Greetings. This is Kateryna Sterenko in the studio with you. Today we're talking about the explosions in Kaliningrad and Tatarstan. The GUR is blowing up a Russian substation and the Shahed factory, while Putin is hiding planes in Chukotka. North Korea is ramping up trade with Russia, supplying fuel and weapons. Iran is ready to give up its nuclear program, but only on the condition that it can retaliate against Israel. Meanwhile, the Russians are using chemical weapons on the front lines. All of this and more in just a few seconds. But right now, please like this video and subscribe to the Ukraine Today channel so you don't get lost on YouTube. All right, let's get started. In Russia, there is a wave of fires, explosions, and panic. Ukrainian drones and intelligence agents have launched new strikes against the Kremlin's war machine. And it seems they are genuinely frightened over there. Let's break it all down step by step. A fire broke out at an industrial substation in Kaliningrad. According to Saspil, citing sources in Ukrainian intelligence, on June 14th at 4 in the morning, GUR agents drained the coolant from a transformer and then set the facility on fire. Russian Federation military facilities were left without power. The damage is estimated at nearly $5 million. Another strike in Tatarstan. According to Russian media, at 6:30 in the morning, a cover regime was declared in Tatarstan due to unidentified drones that attacked a factory in the city of Yelabuga. Iranian Shaheds are assembled there for strikes against Ukraine. The exact consequences are still unknown, but the very fact of an attack on such a key facility speaks volumes.
Looks like cars are burning.
Apparently, the attacks by Ukrainian drones and the SBU's WEB special operation targeting Russian airfields have seriously frightened the Kremlin. Let me remind you that recently the Ukrainian armed forces have destroyed air defense depots and even Russian military aircraft. Now Putin is relocating his strategic bombers as far east as possible to Kamchatka Krai, Chukotka and the Amur region. Our journalist will explain how drone strikes are changing the course of the war.
I'm not a coward, but I am afraid. While Kremlin propaganda desperately tries to convince the world that the Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian airfields have not caused significant damage to Putin's nuclear triad and Russia's strategic aviation, in reality, the Kremlin is frantically trying to hide what's left of its strategic aviation as securely as possible. After the brilliant special operation by the SBU, Russia relocated its most valuable military aircraft farther from Ukraine to Kamchatka, Chukotka and the Amur region.
Putin demanded that the planes be hidden. That scarecrow crawled out and demanded that bases and airfields be prepared in advance for new weapon systems, so that, I quote, they aren't placed in the middle of an open field. By the way, do you know what exactly he plans to prepare these new airfields for? Given the burned aircraft part of that nuclear triad, the air component after Operation Web, soon they'll be able to fit all of them neatly on a single airfield.
And that's not just a figure of speech. In reality, Putin has barely any strategic aviation left that's actually capable of taking to the skies. According to the Telegraph, the Russians have relocated at least two such Tu-160 strategic bomber missile carriers 6,500 kilometers away from the front line. They were transferred to the remote Anadyr airbase. To understand just how remote and isolated this place is, it's enough to know that you can only get there by air or by sea, as satellite images show. The Kremlin's new old strategic airfield is located on the uninhabited Chukotka Peninsula, about 660 kilometers from Alaska. It was built back in the Cold War era to protect the USSR from potential attacks by the United States of America. Now, battered SBU aircraft and MiGs are hiding there from Ukrainian drones.
So it turns out that after hearing this statement from Putin, Ukraine should hide its planes, hide in the wheat, and hide the tanks that are left. In other words, Ukraine has forced Russia to seriously prepare for war across its entire territory.
However, it's not a given that such precautions by Putin will save Russia's strategic aviation. On the contrary, they might backfire on the battered aircraft. Most of the Kremlin's aircraft fleet is over 40 years old. The service life of these metal birds has long been running out. Due to the lack of modernization and proper maintenance, every flight, especially from a remote airfield, could potentially be the last for the Kremlin strategic bombers. It's simply impossible to carry out maintenance on the Tu-160s in the backwaters of Russia. As a result, no matter how much the Kremlin's strategic aviation tries to hide in crevices and remote bases, sooner or later it will have to return to the zone where it is directly vulnerable to the Ukrainian armed forces.
Well, let's put it this way. The possibilities for ongoing repairs and routine maintenance at the main airfields have already been exhausted. Major repairs are required. All Russian aircraft repair plants for this type of aircraft are located in Diaghilevo, which has already been hit, and in Taganrog, which is even closer to the front line than Diaghilevo. That's all. Only 2 plants are capable of repairing this type of aircraft. If the Russians transfer them for repairs, well, most likely, especially with the appearance of our missiles, they will have to say goodbye to these aircraft right there. If they transfer them for repairs, just 2 missiles would be enough to dispel any Russian doubts about the possibility of repairing aircraft there.
A new modern airfield with all the necessary infrastructure could solve this issue. It was precisely such an airfield that Putin ordered to be built. But all of this is just talk. In reality, no one is actually going to build any military base. There isn't the slightest point in doing so. After all, Ukraine could turn it into a pile of twisted concrete at any moment.
Naturally, Putin understands perfectly well that no new airfield for new weapon systems will be built. But of course, he has to give the order on camera. In other words, he says, new bases are super powerful, super great ones with modern weapons. Please make sure to build them with proper protection.
In the end, experts tend to agree that the active redeployment of Russian strategic aviation is nothing more than pointless maneuvers for domestic consumption. In this way, Putin is trying to reassure himself and the Russian people, who were shocked by the brilliant attack of Ukrainian drones on the airfields. In practice, however, the Russian Air Force suffers much more from this decision than from Ukrainian drones. They are wearing out the already extremely limited engine life of their equipment. It will become much more difficult and costly for the Russian army to carry out massive airstrikes from such a distance. And if we recall the Kremlin Air Force's tendency for unauthorized jettisoning of munitions from under the wing, it's quite possible that the lion's share of Russian missiles will end up falling somewhere between Moscow and Chukotka.
While Russia is hiding its planes at the edge of the world, it is strengthening ties with its allies. One of them is North Korea, where Kim Jong Un has just launched a new destroyer. On June 12, Kim Jong Un and his daughter launched one of North Korea's most advanced ships. This is the second attempt. On May 21, it capsized. I ran through the rotary, there the game is being played, Yuria, take it off. But the part of the curl that was in the water destroyed the balance and up. But in just 22 days, it was restored. Now, North Korea is celebrating the success. It is reported that this ship can carry anti-ship missiles, air defense systems, and even ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads. Kim Jong Un stated that the new destroyer is compelling evidence, quote, of the rapid transformation of the North Korean Navy, and promised to build 2 more like it within a year. By the way, this destroyer is not just a North Korean project. After the accident, there have been rumors that it was Russia that may have helped with its repairs not far from its own borders. And, this tandem doesn't surprise me. After all, in 2024, trade between Moscow and Pyongyang soared to a record $34 million thanks to fuel, food, and weapons. More details about this friendship are in our report.
Cooperation between Russia and North Korea is developing rapidly. The number is still hello, sadly, I am like this.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The volume of trade between these pariah states reached a record $34 million last year, thanks to fuel supplies and food exports.
Right now, at this very moment, we are practically witnessing live, in real time, the formation of a new and dangerous axis of evil, quite similar to what existed before and during World War II. Only now, the axis of evil consists of Moscow, Pyongyang, North Korea, and Tehran, Iran.
In 2022, the trade turnover was almost $4 million, and since then it has grown nearly tenfold. This is the highest level of trade since the Soviet Union.
Russia is paying large sums of money and possibly also providing food supplies in exchange for weapons, as well as manpower from North Korea.
North Korea has a communist economic model, so entrepreneurship is prohibited. But in practice, all business there is simply state-owned. Among the main export goods going from Russia to North Korea are food and raw materials.
North Korea is a big problem. That is, where can they find the necessary amount of food? Partly they have always received it from China, and partly, by the way, from Western partners who, despite sanctions on certain companies, supplied food cargo, for example, which is no secret. One of the food giants in the world provided food in exchange for some raw materials produced by North Korea. But undoubtedly, now when North Korea is providing so much weaponry and so many troops, Russia will supply food in order to control the situation in the country and to prevent, so to speak, hunger riots.
It is worth noting that the supply of raw materials to North Korea is accompanied by violations of UN sanctions, which prohibit the import of petroleum products beyond the annual limit of 500,000 barrels. For many years, the DPRK has been violating this limit, using its fleet of tankers to transport fuel from the Russian port of Vostochny. According to analysts' estimates, more than 1 million barrels of oil were shipped in 2024.
Undoubtedly, what Russia is counting on, as we mentioned, is food, but also raw materials, meaning energy resources. So oil is also part of these transactions in exchange for manpower provided by South Korea, as well as these shells and missiles. Russia is not only providing food, but also, without a doubt, supplying energy resources that are essential for maintaining a stable economy in North Korea. So once again, all of this is happening in violation of UN sanctions, which I emphasize Russia voted for as a member of the UN Security Council and had previously supported. But when it becomes inconvenient to uphold the rules you voted for, you simply forget that you supported them and go ahead and break them.
And of course, Russia has provided $20 billion in profit to North Korea through military supplies. With these funds, Moscow purchased ammunition and technical support services and also paid for the deployment of North Korean military personnel to the war in Ukraine.
These agreements have significantly strengthened the relationship between these two countries, which, of course, worries not only North Korea's adversaries, South Korea and Japan, but also to some extent countries that have good relations with both North Korea and Russia. I mean, since China has always considered North Korea to be practically its vassal state, Russia, in fact, is also increasingly being seen as a state dependent on China. And here we are witnessing the processes of these relationships taking shape.
Some experts believe that the current exchange regime between Russia and the DPRK resembles a pre-modern trading system, where the main mechanism is barter.
Absolutely. That is, they are all interested in supporting each other since all of them are pariah states. It's no coincidence that people say the new axis of evil is essentially made up of new outcasts that have emerged in this world. Accordingly, they need to communicate with each other so that their alliance, as they see it, can prevail. But above all, this needs to be demonstrated to the United States of America that an alliance is being formed primarily against the United States. And when the United States lives under the illusion that it can come to an agreement with someone from this alliance, it will lead nowhere, because they all have a single goal: to destroy the United States of America.
To put it simply, two outcasts, Putin and Kim Jong Un, have found each other and joined forces for their own benefit and against other civilized countries.
Meanwhile, another ally of the Russian Federation, Iran, is ready to sign an agreement renouncing nuclear weapons, but insists on retaining the right to peaceful use of nuclear energy. This was stated by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. He noted that Iran will cease strikes on Israel if Israel refrains from attacking Iranian territory. Let us recall that negotiations with Sham were cancelled due to the Israeli operation against Iran's nuclear facilities. Meanwhile, another 200 bodies, including those of military personnel, have been repatriated to Ukraine under agreements reached in Istanbul. However, on the front lines, Russian forces have become more active in the Donetsk region, advancing near Otradne and Zaporizhzhia. Assaults have intensified in the Kramatorsk and Toretsk directions. This was reported by Deep State. Meanwhile, in the Siversk direction, the enemy used chemical weapons against Ukrainian positions. This was reported by the National Guard Brigade Rubez. Meanwhile, in Belarus, troops specializing in unmanned aerial complexes have been established, as reported by Chief of the General Staff Pavel Muravyko during a meeting with Lukashenko. Muravyko noted that they have become an integral part of the country's military structure. A similar step was previously taken by Putin, who announced the creation of a separate branch of unmanned systems troops in the Russian army, with an emphasis on their rapid development. Details coming up right now.
Putin is creating a new branch of the armed forces made up of UAVs.
The effectiveness of their use is constantly increasing. In this regard, I would like to point out that we are now establishing unmanned systems troops as a separate branch of the military. Currently, our drone operators are responsible for a significant portion, up to 50% of the enemy's destroyed and damaged equipment and assets.
Drones are indeed changing the course of the war in many ways, both for the Russians and for the Ukrainians. According to the General Staff of Ukraine, losses caused by the use of FPV drones account for about 70% of personnel casualties. A similar percentage is observed in the losses of armored vehicles.
It should be noted that until recently, the Ukrainian Defense Forces had total superiority in what is called the low airspace. Therefore, accordingly, the casualty ratio of Russian servicemen differs from the figures announced by the Russian dictator.
Despite the fact that Russia has been using drones since 2022, this field has been developing rather slowly for them. According to statements from the Russian side itself, Ukrainians are able to use 4 to 6 drones against individual enemy targets, something the Russians in turn cannot afford.
There is only a draft of a state armament program, and accordingly the formation of a separate branch of the military, namely the Unmanned Systems Forces. Its formation is expected to be completed in the third quarter of 2025.
At the moment, the Russian armed forces include a separate unmanned aviation brigade called Grom Kaskad and the 7 separate reconnaissance and strike regiment of unmanned systems.
They are equipped with respectively drones of 10 different types, mainly Zala drones, including the Lancet, these are strike UAVs, Orlan 30, Supercam, and FPV drones. In other words, they have a rather extensive range of strike capabilities. Moreover, we're talking about both strike drones, including drones that use fiber optics and accordingly reconnaissance drones.
At first glance, the picture seems pretty good, but of course this is the usual attempt to pull the wool over Russians' eyes. In reality, Russian officials have once again found a way to benefit and make money from this.
For example, the units of the separate drone aviation brigade, the Grom Kaskad, are actually referred to as an elite military unit. What this means is that any citizen of the Russian Federation who has the status of a political figure or is associated or connected with business or political circles can sign a formal contract with this particular unit for 3 months and pretend, or rather give the appearance of being actively involved, supposedly right on the front line, thereby obtaining the official status of a combat participant. And accordingly, they receive a wide variety of different financial benefits, including various allowances, as well as opportunities for career advancement.
Russians are indeed scaling up the use of drones, but as we can see, they are doing so in their own interests. The occupiers are improving their situation at the front by using FPV drones connected via fiber optic cables, which are invisible to the Ukrainian electronic warfare systems, and therefore, for now, they have the advantage.
The defense forces of Ukraine and the Ukrainian intelligence community, taking these external challenges into account, are accordingly carrying out a comprehensive set of measures aimed at preventing the scaling up of UAV production and consequently the formation of a separate branch of unmanned systems troops.
In addition to striking legitimate military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation, Ukrainians are also developing their own drones, outpacing the Russians, and their desire to profit from the war and the deaths of their own citizens, of whom 1 million have already perished in Ukraine.
All for now. Please like this video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today right now so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. See you next time.